Welcome to Property Showcase, the podcast that brings you closer to the service providers that can inform your decisions about how you buy, manage and research top investment opportunities. Be informed and become a better investor with Property Showcase.
G'day everyone and welcome back. I'm Tom Gilmour, your host for today on Property Showcase. Guys, jumping straight into it, I've got some pretty cool people in the room with me from Brisbane. And if you're thinking about buying in Brisbane or just generally just having a look at this current time in the current market, I wanted to, I suppose, get a bit of counsel around Brisbane and as to actually what is going on. And I wanted to play a bit of a truth or dare game, or truth or false game, I should say, with Scott and Melinda Jennison from Streamline Property. You may have heard of them before on the Smart Property Investment Show. You may have seen them on the Smart Property Investment website. And they're always writing in. And of course, I appreciate them coming in today. Guys, how are you?
Good, Tom.
Great. Thanks for having us.
No problem at all. Well, look, guys, as I said, jumping straight into it, if I was to sort of look in Brisbane, there's obviously a lot of, I suppose, you can look at data. You may have even been there yourself. You may hear from your best mate, what is going on in Brisbane at this current time. And there's a million things that we can look at. But today I've got some questions that I sort of wanted to just push straight at you. And I really just want to know the truth from you. And seeing as you're the experts, I'm sure you're going to tell me the right answer. So jumping straight into it, I wanted to begin with property data can accurately determine the performance of specific suburbs over the longer term. Melinda, over to you.
Yeah. False. In my opinion, the property markets are actually driven largely by the most dominant buyer group. In this case, they are the owner-occupiers. Basically, in property, it's the only asset class that we live in. So owner-occupiers make up about 70% of all buyers. So if we are buying purely based on data, we're actually only looking at the 30% of buyers that purchase property based on data. So we've also got to consider the metrics that owner-occupiers would look at. It becomes more qualitative data indicators rather than quantitative in terms of desirability, access to public transport, employment hubs, cafes and lifestyle elements.
Okay, perfect. And I suppose moving on to that data point, then my next one, this is quite a good bit of a segue straight into it. Between now and 2041, it is projected that 94% of the additional dwellings needed in Brisbane to keep up with population growth will come from infill development and only 6% from greenfield areas. Is that correct?
Well, it is correct when you're talking about the Brisbane local government area, but when people talk about Brisbane, quite often they talk about Greater Brisbane, which includes the council regions of the Moreton Shire, Redlands, Logan and Ipswich. So if that statement relates to Greater Brisbane, the answer is false because a lot of available land supply exists, especially through Ipswich and also through Logan. So there will be a lot of standard urban residential supply coming to those regions.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Scott, I've got one here for you. This one's actually quite important to me because every time I sort of fly up to Brisbane, when it comes to transport, I often almost immediately think I need a car to get round. I'm not saying that Brisbane has bad public transport whatsoever, but it is quite a large area. And to get around, I often find that it is easy just to either rent a car or if you've got a car up there, just drive around. It is a lot easier. So more than 90% of residents living outside of the Brisbane local government area rely on their own private vehicles for transportation. Is that true?
That's true, yeah. So, Brisbane's changing a lot.
Yep.
With the amount of growth that is forecast and is happening there at the moment. Public transport will be incredibly important. The congestion on the roads have changed. I think it's doubled in the last 10 years. It is just changing dramatically. So that the public transport type of things in the hubs of the public transport in locations where you're buying property, that's extremely important and it will change over time.
Okay, well, that's a good point then. I suppose coming into the radial proximity to the CBD is the only driver of capital growth then.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because Brisbane's not actually a circular city. So Brisbane largely is developed to the north, the south and the southwest. We are bound by mountain ranges to the west and largely a lot of floodplain areas to the east. So, radial proximity is not necessarily a driver for capital growth. There's obviously local supply and demand drivers and also, areas where we've got increased population density and they're largely to the north and to the south and southwest.
Yep, absolutely. And I suppose for people who might not know the Brisbane area too well or perhaps is someone like myself who often, I suppose, combines the Gold Coast, Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast into, I suppose, there's one major city, which it absolutely is not. The coastline of Brisbane itself is all beaches. Is that true or false?
False. So Brisbane's based off the river. Yeah, there are some coastlines there, but a lot of the city and those areas there's rivers and creeks. And so it's also low tide. So once you buy in areas like that, it's affected by flood, overland flow, creek flooding. And at low tide, some of those areas that look quite nice in a photo can be actually quite smelly, mosquitoes and just mud flaps.
The wonders of Photoshop, eh?
Yeah.
So our river does adjoin the bay, Moreton Bay, but, we've got islands off the bay. So, we don't have the direct access to the ocean like some other cities around Australia. So it is quite different when we look at Brisbane's coastline when we're comparing it to other areas around Australia.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, just off the bat, I'm not sure if you would know this actually right off the top of your head. Maybe you do. How many suburbs themselves are actually sort of surrounding that sort of bay area, that whole sort of
I haven't done a count on how many suburbs. There's definitely more to the south than there are to the north. But, a lot of the northern coastal areas are actually mangroves. So, there's no habitable areas there. We've also got the Port of Brisbane on the southern coastline and we've got the Brisbane Airport on the northern coastline. So, they're not necessarily desirable locations when they're full of mangroves and mosquitoes.
Yep, fantastic. Okay, now I'm going to move into construction now. So I might, you can both answer this, but Scott, I might bring this one over to you. Timber homes should be avoided because of the risk of termite damage.
False. So mostly a lot of homes in Brisbane area are tin and timber. You'll probably find anywhere in Australia anyway, a lot of homes there's construction of timber of some sort, whether it is the frame, the roof trusses, the architraves, skirtings, things like that. So there's always termites around and it's just a case of protecting the property using perimeter barriers and treatment that actually avoids that. And if there is damage there, it can always be fixed and there's opportunity in that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose to expand upon that even further, the topic of asbestos. How many homes in Brisbane contain asbestos?
Should we say the other way? How many don't contain? You'll find a lot because of the type of construction and the age of the city. There is a lot of asbestos and it's not a worry. I'm not concerned by it. I live in a house that has asbestos in it and majority of them do, especially as you get closer to the CBD. Again, it's just the way you treat it and how you deal with it. And I'd only use someone that is qualified to do that as well anyway.
Yeah, I think newer constructions, obviously, since asbestos became something that we were all aware of and the concerns around health, newer homes have no asbestos-containing products, but certainly anything that's an older property, pre-war or post-war era, certainly contains asbestos in Brisbane.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, look, continuing on the construction front of things, this might be a good one for people who may already have investments up in Brisbane themselves. But adding a granny flat is a good way to improve investor returns.
True and false. That's probably the best way to answer that question because I think it depends on what an investor is trying to achieve with their portfolio. Whilst a granny flat might improve the yield, the return on the investment, it may actually diminish or minimise capital growth, particularly if you're trying to sell on to a market that is dominated by owner-occupiers. So owner-occupiers don't necessarily see benefit in having a granny flat in the backyard. So it's really important to make sure that you're using that strategy in an area where there is a demand for that and where it's actually legal to do it, because in the Brisbane local government area, you can't actually rent a granny flat under a separate tenancy agreement. So it's not a strategy that works anyway.
Definitely.
I guess it's also, is that what you want to do with your money? A granny flat could cost you $100,000 to $150,000. Is that money better off to think about? Is it better off putting that into your next investment? Or is it better off, and we've done this previously, where you've got a 3-bedroom house and under the existing footprint, we've converted a room into a 4th bedroom. So you've turned a 3-bedroom into a 4-bedroom house. So there's a couple of other ways to think about how you spend your money.
Definitely. Well, look, you've both just touched on a point just then, and that is the case-by-case basis. Everyone's in a different situation, whether they have, 5 properties in their portfolio already, or perhaps they're jumping into their first one. That obviously is quite a bit of a process that you take people through. Could you maybe just touch on just a tiny bit, just on, I suppose, elevator pitch? What's the process that you take people through?
Yeah, look, clients that work with us, the most important thing for us is getting a strategy that works for the client and their personal circumstances. So the first thing we do is gather facts and get clients to complete a fact finder, and then all clients get a one-on-one strategy session with myself to determine what strategy is going to be best for them given their current asset and liability position based on their goals, their risk profile, their timeframes and things like that. So once we're pretty clear on what's going to work for them, some clients come already with a property investment plan, other clients really don't have any plans. So we help them to set about ensuring that the next property that they purchase is going to be the right property based on what their long-term goals are. So we don't buy outside of Brisbane. We're certainly only local specialists, but we can help people with all strategies within Brisbane, whether that's a capital growth strategy, a good balanced strategy of capital growth and yield, or for those investors wanting to manufacture some growth, we can certainly help to position them into properties that have renovation potential or development potential. Some land bank those properties and others go ahead and develop those properties. And because of our experience in project management and also as developers ourselves, we can actually assist clients to push that value into properties by project managing, not only the purchase, but also the whole development, obtaining development approvals, building approvals, and overseeing construction.
Wow.
And it's a thorough, our search is not just data driven. We do the data, we do the numbers, and we look at those things, but we physically look at the property, we look at the adjoining neighbourhood, the shops, the cafes and things like that, and we've developed a 44-point checklist to rule out things like overland flow, flooding and underground services and all those.
Well, I want to see this 44-point checklist. So how do people get in touch with you?
The best way is have a look at our website, streamlineproperty.com.au. You can book an appointment consultation directly there with Melinda. There's a calendar link in there. The phone numbers, you can contact us directly as well. So, the best way is on the website, streamlineproperty.com.au.
Fantastic. And here's the main question. This is what everyone wants to know. Is it a good time to buy in Brisbane right now?
Look, we may be biased, but the data that we are relying on, the numbers that we're reading, the intel that we're, basing our decisions on tells us that Brisbane is very well placed for capital growth, particularly over the next 3 years. But we're not the only ones that are saying that. There's big research groups that are backing Brisbane as well. BIS, Oxford Economics, predicting more than 20% capital growth in the Brisbane property market over the next 3 years, as is the QBE housing market outlook for 2019. So if you don't believe us, perhaps the big research companies might know something as well. So we may be biased, as I said, but look, based on local drivers of capital growth, supply and demand, it's well out of balance at the moment. Demand is massively increasing. Supply, building commencements have really dropped off. And, we're seeing a lot more buyers, looking at open homes. We're seeing demand being driven up, and most properties that we're actually looking at for clients at the moment are moving very quickly to a multi-office situation, which means that there is very, very high demand for a limited number of properties.
Fantastic. Well, guys, you've heard it here first. So if you have any more questions for Scott and Melinda, I recommend that you get in touch because it sounds like you know exactly what you're talking about, being boots on the ground. You've answered all my questions, but are there any sort of other questions or queries that you have, regarding property, or perhaps, you are just taking that first little punt? Definitely get in touch with you guys. But until next time.
Our guest on the show today is Paul Glossop, a regular guest on the show. Actually, Paul is the founder and director of Pure Property Investment. Hello, Paul. How are you? And welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Very well, mates, and thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, there's a bit of a development on your side. You've written and published a book all about property investing. I've had a quick squiz through it earlier. Nice theme that runs through. It's all about surfing.
It is, mate. It's probably a little bit more of a side a bias way to theme up a book, but it's a surface guide to property investing, it was something that was a bit of a brainchild of mine about 18 months ago, where I got to the point where property was and is pretty much my vocation and is my life. But surfing over the last 2-3 decades since I started has been a big part of what shaped my mindset and what I value and time and also other things with my life as well. So the thought came to me, well, they're both one and the same for me. And I thought being able to build a bit more of a brief book on all the different chapters that can relate to surfing, can relate to property investing, to relate to goal setting, to relate to how to live your best life. Ended up being a year's worth of a project and equated to about 50,000 words and 250 pages of a book, which a publisher, and a quick shout out to Major Street Publishing, who were really, really excited to actually take on the book and publish it for me. So it's been an amazing journey.
It's fantastic, and it's a real achievement also to put those words down and actually get them published in a book. A lot of people have that idea, but not everybody gets it done.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. But I tell you what, there's probably no doubt at least a dozen times where I looked at it, maybe a chapter or maybe 3 chapters or 5 chapters in, where I thought, I can't be asked anymore. I'm done with this, because life just gets in the way. But it's kind of got to the point of, like, as you know better than most, mate, training for a marathon as an example, it's not something you can do in a day.
Exactly right.
And you know that you have to plan a long way out to get an outcome. And for me, it was sort of saying, well, I've got this far. I can stop, but ultimately it got to the point where I was saying, this is part of me. I want to really just keep pushing and share the story. So it was a time consuming, but it also reiterated a lot of what I know, and to be able to put it into a book that has chapters. So now I find that every time I pick it up and I look through the chapters of trying to set the mindset, trying to learn about how to, really do the proper groundwork, and all the way going through to picking locations, investment types, renovations, house and land, commercial property, right through to things like the secrets to building long-term wealth, and then all the way through to exit strategies. They built themselves as the book grew as well. And I kind of found that you kind of kept adding layers. And eventually I thought, wow, this is a really, really solid, robust story, but it's probably a little bit of a biography of me selfishly as well, because I just related to how it's worked in my life rather than prescriptively or PhD, this is the way that property investment works. Because the truth is, every property investor you ever speak to has a different story of how they got to where they did. And you can't necessarily say that there is a blueprint for everyone to follow to get success.
And good days and bad. And that's what I like about the theme of the surfing, the analogy of the surfing. Good days and bad. Sometimes the surf is big. Sometimes there's no swell. Sometimes it's all chopped up. Sometimes it's really good. And everybody has different styles. Everybody has a different way of riding a wave,
Massively.
I guess.
Yeah, exactly, mate. And I love it because, everyone who thinks about the actual theme as well has their own connotation. Exactly. And I love it because the way you've just said it then is it's exactly right, is that the way I surf is completely different to the next person, completely different to the person who doesn't surf at all, but has a different thing that they love, whether it's a hobby, a sport, a pastime. You can always relate it to what it is. And instead of being a surfer's guide to property investing, it can be a runner's guide to property investing. It can be a triathlete's guide to property investing. It can be a baker's guide to property investing. Yeah. There is always something that people can relate to and say, I can understand how I'd put my life or put my own position into this book, and then I can follow the guidance as well as different chapters and try to pick what fits for me and how that's going to shape the ability for me to build my property portfolio over the years. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Just a quick sort of, without giving anything away, if somebody was to read that, or when people read that, what are they going to get out of it? What are the things they're going to learn?
I think predominantly the first thing they're going to get is how to figure out what their mindset is and what kind of investor or what kind of life that person really wants to live. And that's not just for the 20-year-olds who are just trying to figure it all out. This is all the way through to people who are just about to retire or have retired and trying to figure out what's important to me. So the first part, and we spend a lot of time on mindset, and then it goes right down into understanding all the different investment types that are available out there and what the pros, cons, and indifferences are between them, and figure out how each one of those fits you as a particular investor once you figured out what your mindset is. And then lastly, I think if I was to summarize in the third section, is to say, well, how do you get to the nirvana, which is living your best life using property investment as the vehicle? And that can include things like exit strategies, pay down strategies, development opportunities, how to create cash flow. So that's the part that we really focus on at the end. So you're going to get mindset, you're going to get investment types, and then you're going to get the actual exit strategies on how to create what everyone talks about, which is a passive income or a flexible life, because you've got an income generating from your portfolio.
It sounds really good. It sounds really something that everybody should be reading. If anybody wants to learn more about it and how to get their hands on it, where do they go from here, Paul?
Yeah, I'm actually allowing every Smart Property Investment Show listener, podcast listener, to get a free copy at the moment. So we're doing a special where if anyone jumps onto Pure Property Investment's Facebook page, they just tap the message button. If they punch in from there the words Smart Property, they'll get all of a sudden the opportunity to just literally hit a button, order the book for free, and we'll put a paperback copy in the post for anyone who does want to actually go and grab yourself a free copy of the book. So Pure Property Investment Facebook page, hit message, tap the word Smart Property.
Fantastic, Paul. Very generous of you, and all the best for that.
Thanks very much, Tim.
Cheers.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.